We are Ann Arbor's Talk Station, 1290 WLBY, the LucyAnn Land Show, along with Mr. Dean Erskine. Coming up, Damian on Design. We have a real special guest in studio. I'm so thrilled that...
Me too. My sister.
Your sister in crime, maybe.
Yeah.
Always.
That too.
We're going to introduce you to Jennifer Conlin, an Ann Arborite who has made her way around the world and back again. We'll talk about that. And she's doing something really cool in Detroit. Is I guess through the New York Times. I want to call you a freelancer, but you actually have a title there, and that is?
Well, I'm a frequent contributor because I actually do contribute quite often to the travel and style sections, and now and then an op-ed, and now and then for the home section as well.
You've worked in journalism since 1984. You're a graduate of the University of Michigan and also the Medill School.
This is true. At Northwestern, I went for 1 year there, and then moved to New York, and then went with my husband for what was supposed to be 2 years overseas in London and turned into 20 years overseas.
Your husband, Dan Rivkin, who was working with Reuters at the time?
Yes, his career was taking us all over, to London, to Paris, to Belgium, so nothing to complain about, really. And finally to Cairo, Egypt, where we fled the revolution and returned to Ann Arbor, where we met at the University of Michigan and where I am originally from.
And you are part of that Conlin family.
That Conlin.
Yes, there are many of us.
There are three brothers in our contemporary age of your father, who's Bill Conlin, the developer and attorney.
Right.
And then there is...
my Uncle Ed, who is still alive and worked in dentistry. And then my Uncle Tom, who started Conlin Travel that my cousin Chris now runs.
And there's an assortment of judges and attorneys and many other professions.
Lots of people in all professions that we can go to when we have needs.
Really, the Conlin family's a dynasty here in Ann Arbor. And what your family has contributed to the fabric of our community is incredible.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
The nonprofit work, everything. So,
and anecdotally, the Conlin family adopted me back in 1983. And my very first weekend in this country as a student was spent up in Harbor Springs. So I got a somewhat tainted view of average life in America. Thanks to
you thought we were all like the Conlins.
Absolutely. I was sharing stuff back with my parents. Of course, we didn't have telephones and email back then, so it was all cards and letters and so on, and all of which my mother kept. But Jenny and I become really brother and sister, in fact, over the 20-some years, actually nearly 30 years that we've known each other.
It's been 30 years. I remember when an ex-boyfriend came over and you didn't help me get rid of him.
I did.
Yeah, you were
I did too.
supposed
He was stalking her through the hedge, and I chased him.
You
I
didn't
chased him
really.
all the way down Belmont.
Nobody cared. Nobody cared about my needs.
Now, is that the same... Is that the same house you're in today?
No.
Oh,
But my parents have been in their house, which, I think it's funny how many people read this article that I wrote about moving in with my parents, and we're all living together now. And we are in the house my parents bought about 22 years ago. And no, I never thought I'd live in it with them, but we're actually having a pretty amazing time.
You write in this New York Times piece about moving back home, we had lived in the eyes of our friends a charmed international life, showing our children the world, vacationing in the south of France and the Italian Alps, taking family trips to visit the ruins in Greece and the graves at Normandy. More recently, we took a cruise down the Nile with a huge gathering of family and friends, a week-long trip that I would later write about for this newspaper. And that would provide a memorable introduction to our new home. It was an amazing way to live until it came to a sudden halt.
It did come to a very fast halt.
You come back to Ann Arbor. Your husband at this time was still kind of wrapping up in Europe?
Well, we were living in Cairo, Egypt, and I was, doing feature stories for the New York Times, and he was handling this sort of global news service that Reuters ran, and we were starting to see how much censorship the government was putting on journalists, particularly with the parliamentary elections that were coming up for Mubarak. We could, basically broadcasters were being asked to reapply for licenses and pay these huge amounts of money. They just were pressing down on free speech. And my husband was concerned about that, and we had 3 children over there, and Mubarak's health wasn't very good. Of course, now he's still alive, but at the time, we thought he would die, and there'd be a revolution when he died. So there were a lot of contributing things, but I was home for the summer in Ann Arbor, as I always did with the children, so they'd have some American experience. And he called and said, don't get on the plane in 3 days. Don't come back. I think the place is going to blow up.
Wow.
So it did. 3 months later, or 4, he got out with our furniture out and everything, just, beginning of November. The furniture arrived on a shipment from Cairo December, and January 25th the revolution hit. And, I'm very happy that we got out, but then again, as journalists, it would have been great to have been there, but not with our belongings and children. So
what year was this again?
This was in 2011, January 25th. I did go back right after Mubarak stepped down 10 days later to do a story for the Times about the situation.
Your life has changed greatly.
It has, but it's fantastic to be back in Ann Arbor.
And isn't it a blessing to live with your folks and to have them have that experience of the grandkids? And
yes, I mean, we were so far. We were, a 3-movie plane ride away from the closest relative for so long. And to have, after 20 years, my kids experience life in America because they moved here as teenagers, having never lived in the States. And to know their grandparents like that in their 80s, and to have that support, because my husband and I still travel for work, and I have the parents there. And, I think that it's a really interesting way to live now, because I see how we're helping them, how they're helping us,
right?
How we can all kind of, my husband and I are journalists, so to pool all our money together is fantastic, because it's not the best of times in journalism, and so we kind of have this kind of group living.
And this was not a choice, though. This was, you had to do this because at the point you came back here, you weren't in a position to buy a house.
No, we had no credit rating even in America. We hadn't lived here forever. We couldn't even get a car if we wanted. So we moved in with my parents with the idea that, we would have that kind of support for a period while we got back on our feet, having been away for so long. And then we just saw how well it was working out and thought, well, why would we... they have a beautiful big house that they were going to sell if we moved out of, because at the end of the day, they didn't need that much space.
Right.
And
little did they know.
Exactly.
I think I'm just going to come back next week and do my show.
Well, it's a fascinating look. And we're actually going to...
I know.
We're actually going to have her husband, Dan Rivkin, in studio, too, to talk
then
about
I'll come back in 2 weeks.
his career. And not during a Damian segment. I wanted everyone to have some...
Well, let's call this living by design. How about that? Can we just back into that one?
Okay, all right.
We wanted people to have some sort of context for who Jennifer
I couldn't
Conlin
resist.
is.
You know me. It's been silent.
That's
I haven't said a word for way too long.
And also how she's been able to design and craft a new career.
Oh, so okay, you're coming around to my spin. I get it. All right, I'm getting the spin now. Okay.
Yes, you are.
So for the last 30 seconds of our show.
That new career, CriticCar Detroit.
There we go.
What
okay,
is
and
this
Damian,
concept?
I'm going to address this to you because, I hate to hurt your feelings ever. I know the attention you require. Basically...
The show has totally gotten away from me.
So when I got back from being overseas, I was asked to go in and do a couple pieces on Detroit for the paper. And of course...
For the New York Times.
Yes. So first I did, a travel piece about coming to visit Detroit, 36 hours in Detroit, and then I did a piece about all the artists and young entrepreneurs moving to Detroit, because there had been so much about everybody leaving Detroit that I felt the need, to sort of show that actually you have a lot of young people going in.
And one of those articles, sorry, LucyAnn, set a record for blogging of some sort. Am I remembering correctly?
No, both of the 36 hours in Detroit and the Detroit Muscles Harder, I think was the headline, something like that. Both went to number 1 and number 2 on the most emailed list, which I think surprised my editors that at the New York Times how much people were interested in Detroit.
So you're the reason Detroit is back. I love that.
Yeah, she and Dan Gilbert. Okay.
To take that credit.
Jennifer's got the pen, he's got the checkbook, right?
Well, how fortunate we are that we had someone from the New York Times writing about Detroit who actually knew our state, knew the city, knew what was the undercurrent of happening in Detroit. Yeah.
Well, I tend to, there's a, much more proficient, smarter people than me, who at the Times who are writing about all the really nitty gritty of the financial emergency, financial manager, and that kind of stuff. I'm the feel good feature writer, so I get to do the nice stuff. But yes, there's a lot of trouble, of course, we all know in Detroit. But in the process of going in and writing about them, and always having so many ideas of stories I want to do in Detroit, my editors were like, "It's enough. There's only so much we can write about Detroit." So I came up with this idea for CriticCar Detroit, because there was a National Arts Journalism Challenge that the NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, and the Knight Foundation were sponsoring, and they said, we will give $100,000 to anyone who comes up with great ideas for these economically challenged cities, Detroit being one, that are losing their arts criticism in terms of journalists, particularly. No funding at the newspapers for those positions. So I came up with this idea for CriticCar Detroit, and we ended up, there were 230 applications across the country, and there were only 3 winners, and we won for Detroit.
I didn't know you actually got one of these. This is an
Yeah,
NEA grant?
It's a National Endowment for the Arts Knight Foundation grant.
Congratulations. I hadn't realized that's how this was funded.
Yes.
CriticCar is a mobile recording booth that travels the city of Detroit.
Well, it was supposed to be a booth. We thought of CriticCar being a car that would go around and get people in the back of the car in a kind of mobile studio, asking them what they thought about arts and culture on camera. Mm-hmm. But in the end, my focus groups were like a lot of young women and even young men like, I'm not getting in the back of some car in Detroit.
Wait,
this wasn't going to be taxi cab.
I was going to say, they do it in a taxi cab.
Yeah.
Well, I had the idea of like Cash Cab, kind of, which is one of my favorite shows. But in the end, we decided the car is actually just now part of the way we get around. We zoom around and we go to different arts and cultural events in Detroit, and we kind of grab people and film them simply on an iPad because we find that's less threatening. It's citizen arts journalism. I ask them, what do you think of what you just experienced at the Fillmore, at the Fox, at the Jam Handy, at the Heidelberg Project? And we go around and we say 30 seconds to a minute. We post them on YouTube. We give them to post on Facebook. We post on Facebook. And the whole idea was very simple. Just shout out about Detroit arts and culture on social media to try to get more people into the city, because truly, I can tell you as a reporter who's lived all over the world, Detroit is one of the most fascinating places I could ever work.
Why?
Because the people who have stayed there and who have supported that city through all its difficulties are so resilient and so amazing, and it's their voices that just make my heart sing. And they are the people that I'm kind of getting on camera talking about their own community, and they just believe so much in the legacy of their city.
And it's significant on those videos too, I think, to see the age span.
Right.
It's across the board.
Right, it's across the board, and I get these little kids who are in the Charles Wright Museum who've just seen the Obama exhibit or the African American slavery exhibit, and then I go over to, the Opera House, and you can get a whole different crowd coming out of, an amazing dance performance. But, for instance, we've been covering Art X all weekend. We will be covering Art X all weekend. It opened last night. It's a Kresge-sponsored 5-day arts festival in Detroit. It began last night at MoCAD, which is the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit. And just so many people were so excited to see us there and tell us how much they're enjoying everything going on in Detroit.
I'm curious to know, when someone sees something artistic, how well they can describe the experience they just came out of.
We give them, I have these little cards, and we give them to them, and it sort of says, there's some prompts on it, because it is difficult, and some people get camera shy, and they haven't, ever been asked to have a microphone in front of them. Mm-hmm. And so we'll say to them, describe a scene you liked, or, obviously we don't want people to just say it was awesome or it was great. Describe a scene you liked, describe one actress that you liked, describe one painting. So last night there was a woman talking about one of the exhibits, because the Kresge Arts Fellows had done these exhibits that were up, and she said, oh gosh, I just loved, the woman who was on the motorcycle racing through the landscape. Something like that, just a little clip like that put up on YouTube with all these other videos can sort of get somebody to go like, oh, I kind of want to see that.
Yeah.
What is she talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to go to Detroit to see that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, people do need a little prompting sometimes, but part of it is you don't have to be this arts, professional arts critic to talk about what art is. Just how you feel about something, really. Mm-hmm. So if a painting moves you, or if a piece of music moves you. I mean, we have some people who go like, that was weird, or I didn't really like that. I don't know why, but that also is something that art should do. It just makes you think.